The Galactic Council chambers hummed with the soft vibrations of 1,000 different species breathing, chittering, and communicating in their native tongues. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat quietly in the human delegation section, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she observed the heated debate unfolding before them. The topic today was trade routes through the Kepler sector, a seemingly mundane discussion that had somehow escalated into accusations and territorial disputes. Sarah had been humanity's representative for 3 years now, ever since Earth had been granted junior membership status in the Council. The other species still viewed humans as newcomers, barely evolved beyond their primitive homeworld. They saw humans as weak, naive creatures who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than evolution. Sarah had grown accustomed to the condescending glances and dismissive comments from the more established civilizations. The Zephyrians, tall, blue-skinned beings with crystalline growths along their spines, dominated much of the current discussion. Their speaker, High Chancellor Vextai, gestured dramatically with his forearms as he outlined their territorial claims. The Kepler routes have been under Zephyrian protection for over 2 centuries, he declared, his voice carrying the authority of the species that controlled 17 star systems. Across the chamber, the insectoid hive cluster delegation buzzed in disagreement. Their queen speaker, a magnificent creature whose iridescent carapace caught the artificial lighting, clicked and whistled her response. The translation came through Sarah's earpiece moments later. Protection implies care and nurturing. The Zephyrians exploit these routes for profit, while smaller species suffer. Sarah watched the exchange with professional interest, taking mental notes for her report back to Earth. These debates often revealed more about galactic politics than any intelligence briefing. The Corvin Empire, reptilian beings known for their military prowess, remained silent in their section. Their delegate, General Thakmore, kept his yellow eyes fixed on the proceedings with predatory patience. The Ethereals, energy beings who communicated through color shifts in their translucent forms, pulsed with pale orange light indicating mild irritation. They rarely involved themselves in physical trade routes, preferring to deal in information and energy currencies. Their presence at this debate suggested something more significant was at stake than simple commerce. Ambassador Yethka of the Serene Collective, a peaceful amphibian species, attempted to mediate. Perhaps we could establish shared oversight, she suggested, her webbed hands making calming gestures. Multiple species working together for mutual benefit. High Chancellor Vextai's crystalline spines flared brighter, a sign of increasing agitation. The Serene Collective speaks of cooperation while their merchant vessels undercut our established shipping rates. This is economic warfare disguised as diplomacy. The accusation sent ripples of tension through the chamber. Economic warfare was a serious charge in galactic law, potentially leading to trade sanctions or even military intervention. Sarah felt the atmosphere shift as delegates began taking sides, old alliances and rivalries surfacing despite the supposedly neutral nature of the discussion. She had observed dozens of these debates during her tenure, watching as civilizations with thousands of years of history maneuvered for advantage. Humanity, barely 2 centuries into space travel, was usually ignored during such discussions. They were considered too young, too inexperienced to have meaningful opinions on galactic affairs. The hive cluster queen speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly as she responded to the Zephyrians' accusation. Economic efficiency is not warfare. The Serene Collective provides services at fair market value, while the Zephyrians inflate prices through monopolistic practices. Sarah noticed movement in the Corvin section. General Thakmore had leaned forward slightly, his massive frame casting shadows across nearby delegates. The Corvins have been expanding their territory aggressively over the past decade, using their military superiority to intimidate smaller species into favorable trade agreements. Military protection requires compensation. Thakmore finally spoke, his voice a deep rumble that carried clearly across the chamber. The Corvin Empire has patrol vessels throughout the sector. Perhaps official protection contracts would resolve these disputes. The suggestion was barely veiled extortion, but delivered with the casual confidence of a species that controlled one of the galaxy's most powerful fleets. Several smaller delegations shifted nervously in their seats, already calculating the cost of Corvin protection versus the risk of raids by the various pirate factions that plagued unprotected routes. Sarah felt a familiar frustration building as she watched the interplay. Every solution proposed seemed to benefit the major powers, while smaller species were forced to choose between exploitation and vulnerability. Humanity wasn't even considered significant enough to exploit yet, but she could see their future if nothing changed. The debate continued for another hour, with accusations flying and positions hardening. The ethereals withdrew their consciousness partially, their forms fading to indicate displeasure with the proceedings. The aquatic delegates from Beta Hydri made gurgling sounds of distress as they realized their own trade routes might be affected by whatever agreement emerged. Finally, Council Moderator Ninethal called for a brief recess. The ancient being, whose species had helped found the Council millennia ago, gestured with tentacles that glowed with bioluminescent patterns. We will reconvene in 1 standard hour to hear proposed solutions from all member species. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained in her seat, reviewing her notes on a small tablet. The human delegation's orders had been clear: observe, learn, and avoid taking sides in major disputes. Earth wasn't ready for the kind of political entanglements that could result from backing the wrong faction. Enjoying the show, human? The voice belonged to Sub-Chancellor Mordex, a Zephyrian junior diplomat who had approached Sarah's section during the recess. Sarah looked up, maintaining the polite smile that had served her well in diplomatic circles. Educational, certainly. The Council's deliberations are always illuminating. Mordex's spines dimmed to a pale blue, indicating amusement. You speak like a proper diplomat, but your species lacks the experience to understand what you're witnessing. This is how real civilizations conduct business. The condescension was typical, though usually delivered with more subtlety. Sarah nodded acknowledgement without taking the bait. We're here to learn from more experienced species, like the Zephyrians. Indeed you are, Mordex agreed, apparently satisfied with her deference. Perhaps Earth would benefit from Zephyrian guidance in developing proper trade relationships. We could arrange favorable terms for human shipping through our controlled routes. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut through their conversation. How generous of the Zephyrians to offer protection to the humans. General Thakmore had approached silently, his massive form looming over both delegates. Of course, the Corvin Empire might have different arrangements to propose. The temperature in Sarah's section seemed to drop several degrees as the two military powers faced each other through their representatives. She realized she was witnessing the kind of great power competition that could easily engulf smaller species caught between them. Mordex's spines brightened to a more aggressive yellow-white. The Corvins mistake military strength for diplomatic sophistication. Humanity would be better served by partners who understand both commerce and culture. Military strength protects commerce and culture, Thakmore replied with predatory calm. The humans are practical beings. They will recognize the value of effective protection. Sarah felt like prey caught between two predators, which wasn't far from the truth. Both species were powerful enough to make life difficult for humanity if they chose, but accepting protection from either would likely mean eventual subordination. She was searching for a diplomatic response when the session bell chimed, calling delegates back to their seats. The remainder of the session proceeded with little resolution. Various compromises were proposed and rejected, with each major power protecting its interests while smaller species found themselves increasingly marginalized. Sarah took careful notes, recognizing patterns that might prove important for future human interactions with the galactic community. As the session finally concluded with a decision to table the matter for further committee review, Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave. She had a report to file and recommendations to make, though she suspected Earth's leadership would continue their cautious approach to galactic politics. The human delegation's quarters were located in one of the newer sections of the Council Station, reflecting their junior status. As Sarah walked through the corridors, she passed members of various species heading to their own accommodations or recreational facilities. The diversity still amazed her sometimes, despite years of exposure to galactic society. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander David Park, was waiting in their briefing room with preliminary intelligence reports. "How did it go?" he asked as Sarah settled into her chair. "Typical power politics," she replied, activating the secure communication link to Earth. The Zephyrians and Corvins are maneuvering for control of the Kepler routes, with smaller species caught in the middle. We received some interesting offers of protection. David's expression darkened slightly. What kind of offers? Sarah related her conversations with Mordex and Thakmore, watching as David's jaw tightened with controlled anger. He had served in the Earth Defense Fleet before joining the Diplomatic Corps, and he understood military threats better than most civilians. Sounds like a protection racket to me, he said finally. Pay up or face the consequences. Sarah nodded grimly. That's essentially what it is, though dressed up in diplomatic language. The question is how long we can avoid choosing sides before the choice is made for us. They spent the next 2 hours compiling their report, analyzing the various factions and their likely next moves. The Ethereals seemed to be positioning themselves as neutral brokers, while the Hive Cluster was building a coalition of smaller species. The Serene Collective appeared genuinely interested in peaceful cooperation, but they lacked the military power to enforce their ideals. As Sarah finally prepared for sleep in her quarters, she found herself thinking about Earth's place in this complex web of relationships. Humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel and established colonies on several worlds, but they remained vulnerable compared to species with millennia of galactic experience. The human fleet was growing, and Earth's industrial capacity was impressive by galactic standards, but they still lacked the political connections and strategic resources of the major powers. Sarah wondered how long their careful neutrality could last before they were forced to pick a side in the galaxy's ongoing power struggles. Her last thought before sleep was a question that had been nagging at her for months. What would happen when humanity was finally tested? Every species in the galaxy had been shaped by conflict, evolution, and survival. The peaceful facade of the council chambers couldn't hide the predatory nature that lurked beneath civilized diplomacy. Humanity had its own predatory instincts, carefully controlled by law and social convention. But Sarah had read the history books, studied the wars and conquests that had shaped human civilization. She wondered if the other species truly understood what they were dealing with when they looked at humans and saw only naive newcomers. Tomorrow would bring new sessions, new debates, and new opportunities for political maneuvering. Sarah drifted off to sleep, unaware that events were already in motion that would soon answer all her questions about humanity's place in the galaxy. The emergency session alarm pierced through the council station's normal ambient hum at 0347 Standard Galactic Time. Sarah Chun jolted awake in her quarters, immediately reaching for her secure communicator as years of diplomatic training kicked in. Emergency sessions were rare, usually reserved for imminent threats to galactic security or major diplomatic crises. Ambassador, we have a situation. David Park's voice came through clearly despite the early hour. Unknown vessels have appeared in the Kepler sector. They're not responding to standard communications protocols. Sarah was already pulling on her formal diplomatic robes as she processed the information. How many ships? What's their configuration? That's the problem, David replied, and she could hear the concern in his voice. Initial reports vary wildly. Some sources say 3 massive vessels. Others report dozens of smaller craft. The sensor readings aren't making sense. Within 30 minutes, Sarah was in the emergency session chamber along with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The normal procedural delays have been suspended, and Council Moderator Ninethal's tentacles were pulsing with urgent bioluminescent patterns as he addressed the assembled delegates. At approximately 0230 Standard Time, long-range sensors detected the emergence of unidentified vessels in the Kepler sector, the Ancient being announced. Initial contact attempts have failed. The vessels appear to be using technology that interferes with our standard scanning methods. The main display activated, showing a 3-dimensional representation of the Kepler sector. Red icons mark the positions of the unknown ships, though their exact numbers and configurations remained unclear due to the sensor interference. What was clear was their positioning. They had appeared directly along the most contested trade routes, the very ones that had been debated so hotly just hours before. High Chancellor Vextai was the first to speak, his crystalline spines bright with agitation. The Zephyrian Patrol fleet reports complete communications blackout with our vessels in that sector. Our merchant convoys were due to arrive at Kepler Station 6 hours ago. General Thakmore's yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the display. Corvin Battle Group Omega-7 was conducting routine patrols in the area. They have not reported in for over 4 hours. This is not acceptable. Sarah felt a chill as the implications became clear. Both major powers had lost contact with their forces in the sector. Either the unknown vessels were extremely powerful, or something catastrophic had happened to the Zephyrian and Corvin fleets. The Hive Cluster Queen Speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly as she received updates from her own sources. Our trading post on Kepler 7 has gone silent. The last transmission mentioned strange energy readings before communication ceased. Ambassador Yethka of the Serene Collective was visibly distressed, her amphibian features pale with worry. We have 3 colony ships in transit through that sector, carrying over 50,000 civilians. They were scheduled to reach safety in Confederation space by dawn. The chamber erupted into urgent discussions as the scope of the crisis became apparent. Thousands of beings from multiple species were potentially at risk, along with critical trade infrastructure and military assets. Sarah noticed that the ethereals had manifested their physical forms more solidly than usual, their energy patterns indicating extreme concern. "Do we have any visual confirmation of these vessels?" asked Chancellor Morthek of the Aquatic Alliance, his translator filtering the complex underwater sounds of his native language. Council moderator Ninethal gestured toward the display, which shifted to show grainy long-range images captured by automated monitoring stations. The vessels visible in the images defied easy categorization. They appeared to be massive, dark structures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their shapes were irregular, almost organic, and they moved through space in formations that suggested intelligence, but followed no recognized tactical patterns. These images were taken from monitoring station Kepler Alpha before it ceased transmitting, Ninethal explained. Analysis suggests the vessels are larger than our initial estimates, possibly exceeding the size of Corvin dreadnoughts. General Thakmore's massive frame tensed at the comparison. Corvin dreadnoughts were among the largest military vessels in known space, capable of devastating entire fleets. If the unknown ships were even larger, they represented a threat unlike anything the galaxy had faced in living memory. Sub-Chancellor Mordex stood to address the chamber, his earlier diplomatic polish replaced by obvious concern. The Zephyrian government formally requests immediate council intervention. We have legitimate territorial claims in the Kepler sector, and these vessels represent an unacceptable violation of galactic sovereignty. The Corvin Empire seconds this request, Thakmore added with grim authority. Military action may be necessary to resolve this situation. Sarah watched the proceedings with growing unease. The 2 species that had been at each other's throats over trade routes were now united in their concern about the unknown threat. When natural enemies agreed on military action, the situation was truly serious. The ethereals chose that moment to contribute to the discussion, their spokesperson manifesting as a shimmering humanoid form of pure energy. "We have attempted to establish communication through quantum-entangled consciousness projection," the being announced, its voice carrying harmonic overtones that resonated through the chamber. "The entities operating these vessels possess mental architectures unlike any we have encountered. Their thoughts are structured in patterns that suggest profound aggression and hunger." The revelation sent waves of shock through the assembled delegates. The ethereals were the galaxy's experts on consciousness and mental communication, capable of touching the minds of most known species. If they found these entities incomprehensible and aggressive, the threat was even greater than anyone had imagined. "Hunger for what?" Ambassador Yethka asked, though her tone suggested she feared the answer. "Consumption," the ethereal replied simply. They perceive other life forms as resources to be harvested and integrated. Their mental patterns indicate vast experience with conquest and assimilation. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't dealing with a territorial dispute or communication failure, but with predators from outside known space who viewed galactic civilization as prey. Council moderator Ninethal's tentacles writhed with distress patterns as he processed this information. If this assessment is accurate, we face an existential threat to all member species. Emergency protocols must be activated immediately. Sarah found herself thinking about Earth's small but growing fleet scattered across human colonies and trade routes. If these entities were as powerful as the evidence suggested, humanity's military forces would be completely outmatched. She opened a discreet communication channel to David Park, who was monitoring the situation from their delegation offices. "Status on human assets in the sector," she transmitted. "Checking now," David replied through the encrypted link. "We have 2 merchant vessels in the outer system and 1 exploration ship conducting surveys near the asteroid fields." Sarah's blood ran cold. Human ships were in the danger zone, though hopefully far enough from the main shipping lanes to avoid immediate contact with the unknown vessels. She faced a difficult decision: reveal humanity's presence in the sector and risk being drawn into a conflict they couldn't win, or stay silent and hope their people could escape undetected. High Chancellor Vextai was outlining a proposal for joint military action when new alerts began flashing across the chamber's information displays. "Additional contacts detected," announced the station's automated systems. Unknown vessels are now present in 7 star systems along the galactic rim. The scope of the crisis had just expanded exponentially. What had begun as a localized incident in the Kepler sector was now clearly a coordinated invasion involving multiple target zones. The unknown entities weren't just passing through or seeking specific resources. They were positioning themselves to strike at galactic civilization from multiple angles simultaneously. General Thakmore stood with predatory grace, his massive form radiating controlled violence. "The Corvin Empire hereby declares a state of military emergency. We are mobilizing our full battle fleet and request immediate coordination with allied forces." "The Zephyrian Star Command concurs," Vextai added, his crystalline spines now glowing with bright combat patterns. "Our differences over trade routes are irrelevant in the face of this threat. We propose the formation of an emergency military alliance." Sarah watched as centuries of careful diplomatic balance collapsed in the face of external threat. Species that had maintained delicate neutrality or historic rivalries were suddenly willing to set aside their differences to face a common enemy. The speed of the transformation was both impressive and terrifying. The Hive Cluster Queen Speaker buzzed urgently as she received new information through her species' quantum communication network. "Our outer colonies report additional vessel sightings. The entities appear to be conducting systematic reconnaissance of inhabited systems, focusing on population centers and industrial installations." Ambassador Yethka's webbed hands trembled as she accessed her own government's emergency communications. "The Serene Collective's border monitoring stations have detected energy signatures consistent with massive weapon systems. These vessels appear to be preparing for coordinated assault operations." The evidence was mounting that the galaxy faced not just an invasion, but a carefully planned conquest campaign. The unknown entities had appeared simultaneously across multiple sectors, studied their targets, and were now positioning for systematic attack. The level of coordination suggested intelligence capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of the most advanced galactic civilizations. Sarah made her decision. "Council moderator," she said, rising from her seat, "the human delegation requests permission to share relevant intelligence regarding this crisis." A ripple of surprise went through the chamber. Humanity rarely spoke during major discussions, and their intelligence capabilities were generally considered minimal compared to established powers. Several delegates turned to stare at Sarah with expressions ranging from curiosity to mild amusement. Ninethal's tentacles shifted to acknowledgement patterns. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Chun of the Human Federation. Please proceed." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might irrevocably change humanity's position in galactic politics. "Human vessels are currently present in the Kepler sector conducting authorized exploration and merchant activities. Our exploration ship Endeavor has been monitoring unusual energy patterns in the asteroid field for the past week." The chamber's attention sharpened immediately. If humans had been observing the situation before the official crisis began, their data might provide crucial intelligence about the invaders' capabilities and intentions. "What did your people observe?" General Thacmore asked with newfound interest. Sarah activated her personal datapad and transmitted the files to the chamber's main display. Our scientists detected gravitational anomalies and exotic energy emissions beginning 6 days ago. The patterns suggested massive objects moving through hyperspace using technology that creates significant space-time distortions. The technical data appeared on the shared screens, and several species scientists began analyzing the information immediately. The readings showed clear evidence of multiple large objects transitioning between normal space and hyperspace repeatedly, as if testing the galaxy's sensor networks and response capabilities. "Why wasn't this information shared earlier?" demanded Subchancellor Mordex, though his tone was more curious than accusatory. "Our analysis was incomplete, and the readings were considered anomalous rather than threatening," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Human exploration protocols emphasize caution in reporting unconfirmed phenomena to avoid unnecessary alarm." General Thacmore's yellow eyes focused on the data with professional intensity. "These readings show systematic probing of defensive positions and communication networks. Your explorers documented the enemy's reconnaissance phase. The realization that the invaders have been studying galactic defenses for nearly a week sent another wave of concern through the chamber. The entities weren't just technologically advanced. They were methodical strategists who had taken time to understand their targets before revealing themselves." Sarah's revelation had accomplished two important things. It established human intelligence capabilities as more sophisticated than previously assumed, and it positioned humanity as a valuable partner in understanding the enemy threat. She could see calculations running behind the eyes of various delegates as they reassessed their assumptions about human capabilities. The emergency session continued for several more hours as intelligence was pooled and defensive strategies discussed. Sarah found herself increasingly involved in tactical discussions, her species' unique perspective proving valuable as the Council struggled to understand an enemy unlike any they had faced before. As the immediate planning session concluded and delegates prepared for continuous crisis management, Sarah realized that humanity's careful neutrality was ending. The invasion had forced them into the center of galactic politics, whether they wanted it or not, and the choices they made in the coming hours would determine Earth's future among the stars. The first confirmed attack came 18 hours after the emergency session began. The trading post on Kepler-7, home to over 30,000 beings from 17 different species, simply vanished from all sensors simultaneously. No distress calls, no debris field, no energy signatures marking destruction. One moment it existed as a thriving commercial hub, and the next it was gone as if it had never been there at all. Sarah Chun stood in the Council's Emergency Command Center, watching the real-time tactical displays with growing horror. The command center had been hastily established in one of the station's cargo bays, filled with communication equipment and tactical displays from a dozen different species. The normal hierarchy of galactic politics had collapsed into a functional military structure within hours. "Confirm erasure of Kepler-7, reported technical specialist Zextal from the ethereal contingent, their energy form flickering with patterns Sarah had learned to recognize as extreme distress. No quantum echoes remain. The entire structure and all contained life forms have been completely removed from this dimensional framework." General Thacmore's massive claws scraped against the metal flooring as he processed this information. "Removed, not destroyed? Explain the difference." "Destruction leaves traces," the ethereal replied, their harmonic voice carrying undertones of barely controlled fear. "Energy dispersal, quantum fragments, consciousness echoes. This is complete negation. The matter and energy that comprise Kepler-7 has been absorbed into something else entirely." Sarah felt her hands trembling and forced them to stillness. The implications were terrifying beyond comprehension. The enemy wasn't just attacking galactic civilization. They were consuming it entirely, leaving no trace of what had existed before. High Chancellor Vextai's crystalline spines had dimmed to pale blue patterns of deep concern. "Our defense fleet reports similar phenomena at 3 other contact points. Entire vessels simply cease to exist when the unknown ships engage them. No weapons fire is detected, no energy exchanges. Contact and immediate disappearance." The tactical situation was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Traditional military doctrine assumed that conflicts involve the exchange of energy weapons, the destruction of physical structures, and the dispersal of matter and energy according to known physical laws. This enemy operated by completely different rules. Lieutenant Commander Park approached Sarah with a secure datapad containing updates from human assets in the crisis zone. Ambassador, we've lost contact with the merchant vessel Prosperity. Last transmission was a standard navigation update 43 minutes ago. Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly as she realized human beings were among the disappeared. The Prosperity carried a crew of 47, including families of colonists heading to establish a new settlement in the Outer Rim. They were gone now, not dead, but erased, absorbed into whatever incomprehensible hunger drove the invaders. "Any word from Endeavor?" she asked, referring to the exploration vessel that had first detected the anomalous readings. "Still maintaining communications blackout, per standing orders," David replied. Captain Martinez activated deep stealth protocols when the crisis began. They're hiding in the asteroid field's sensor shadow, but they can't stay concealed indefinitely if the enemy conducts systematic searches. The command center's main display updated with new intelligence from the surviving monitoring stations. Red zones now marked 7-star systems where the unknown vessels had appeared, with expanding circles showing their areas of influence. The pattern that emerged was clearly strategic. The invaders were targeting critical infrastructure nodes, trade hubs, and population centers in a coordinated campaign designed to cripple galactic civilization's ability to respond. Ambassador Yethka of the Serene Collective approached Sarah, her amphibian features drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Ambassador Chun, your species has experience with predatory behavior patterns that others may not fully understand. What tactical analysis can humans provide?" The question surprised Sarah, but she recognized the logic behind it. Most galactic species had evolved beyond their predatory phases millennia ago, developing into civilizations focused on cooperation and resource management. Humanity was among the youngest species in the galaxy, still carrying evolutionary instincts that older civilizations had bred out of their populations. "Predators typically follow patterns," Sarah replied, calling up her knowledge of Earth's military history and evolutionary biology. "They probe for weaknesses, isolate prey from protective groups, and strike when targets are most vulnerable. The systematic nature of these attacks suggests the enemy has studied our defensive capabilities and identified optimal strike points." General Thackmore overheard the conversation and approached with interested attention. "Expand on this analysis, human. The Corvin Empire recognizes predatory tactics, but your species may perceive patterns we have missed." Sarah moved to the tactical display and highlighted the enemy attack points with her data stylus. "Look at the timing and positioning. They're not attacking randomly or targeting the strongest positions first. They're systematically eliminating communication nodes and supply lines, cutting our forces into isolated groups that can't coordinate effective responses." She traced lines between the attack points, revealing a pattern that hadn't been obvious before. "They're creating dead zones in our intelligence network. Each facility they eliminate was a critical link in our communication and sensor chains. We're being blinded systematically." The revelation sent murmurs of understanding through the assembled delegates. The enemy wasn't just powerful. They were conducting a sophisticated information warfare campaign designed to prevent coordinated resistance. They had studied galactic civilization thoroughly enough to identify its critical vulnerabilities. Zextal's energy form brightened with what Sarah had learned to recognize as the ethereal equivalent of insight. "This analysis correlates with our consciousness monitoring data. The entities are not simply aggressive. They demonstrate strategic intelligence comparable to our most advanced civilizations. They understand our social and technological structures well enough to attack them systematically." High Chancellor Vexdai's spines flared with renewed agitation. How is this possible? No unknown species should possess such detailed knowledge of galactic infrastructure. Our security protocols are designed to prevent exactly this kind of intelligence gathering. "Unless," Sarah said quietly, a terrible thought forming in her mind, "they've been watching us for longer than we realized. The energy readings our exploration ship detected suggest they were studying us for at least a week before revealing themselves. But what if that was just the final phase of a much longer observation period? The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the enemy had been monitoring galactic civilization for months or years without detection, they would have had time to map every defensive installation, communication network, and strategic resource. The invasion wasn't opportunistic. It was the culmination of extensive preparation. General Thakmore's predatory instincts were clearly engaged as he studied the tactical data. Human assessment appears accurate. This enemy has conducted reconnaissance equivalent to a multi-year intelligence operation. They know our strengths, weaknesses, and operational procedures better than we understand theirs. Before anyone could respond, new alerts began flashing across the command center's displays. Emergency transmission from the Kepler sector announced the station's communication officer, a multi-armed being from the Coordination Collective. The main screen shifted to show static-filled transmission data from an automated distress beacon. Through the interference, fragmented images appeared of massive dark shapes moving through space near human colonies in the outer rim. The timestamp showed the transmission was less than 10 minutes old. Source identification demanded Vextai. Colonial Station New Perth, Human Outer Rim Settlement. The communication officer replied. Population approximately 12,000. The beacon activated automatically when station defenses detected approaching vessels. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the colony designation. New Perth was one of humanity's newest settlements, established only 3 years ago by families seeking agricultural opportunities in previously unclaimed space. Her own sister lived there with her family, working as a hydroponic specialist for the colonial administration. Current status of the colony? She asked, though she feared the answer. The communication officer manipulated several control interfaces before responding with obvious reluctance. Transmission ceased 47 seconds ago. Colonial Beacon is no longer responding to queries. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a cold clarity that she had never experienced in diplomatic situations. The professional distance that had allowed her to analyze the crisis objectively vanished as the reality struck home. Her sister, her nephew, 12,000 human beings had just been erased from existence by entities that consumed civilization itself. David Park noticed the change in her expression immediately. Ambassador? Sarah looked around the command center at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. They were brilliant beings from advanced species with thousands of years of experience. But they were approaching this crisis like a diplomatic problem to be solved through negotiation and careful strategy. They didn't understand what they were facing because they had evolved beyond the instincts necessary for true survival warfare. We need to contact Earth immediately, she said with quiet intensity that made several nearby delegates turn to look at her. What resources can the human homeworld provide? Asked Thakmore with professional interest. Your military capabilities are limited compared to established powers. Sarah's lips curved in what might have been a smile, though there was no warmth in it. General, with respect, you don't understand what you're asking. Earth's military capabilities aren't limited. They're restrained. The distinction seemed lost on most of the assembled delegates, but David Park understood immediately. His own military background included classified knowledge about Earth's true defensive capabilities, the weapons, and strategies that were considered too dangerous for routine deployment. Ambassador, he said carefully, are you certain this situation warrants that level of response? Sarah looked at the tactical display, showing the expanding zones of enemy control, the disappeared colonies, and consumed fleets. She thought about her sister's family, about the 47 crew members of the Prosperity, about the 30,000 beings who had lived at Kepler 7 until they were simply erased from existence. They're not trying to conquer us, she said, her voice carrying across the command center with quiet authority. They're not seeking territory or resources or political advantage. They're consuming us. This isn't a war. It's an extermination. The chamber had grown quiet as delegates sensed the change in the human ambassador's demeanor. Even General Thakmore, a being bred for warfare, seemed uncertain how to respond to the cold intensity radiating from Sarah. She turned to face the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. You've all evolved beyond your predatory phases. You've built sophisticated societies based on cooperation and rational negotiation. But some of us remember what it takes to survive when faced with existential threats. Ambassador Yethka stepped forward with genuine concern. Ambassador Chun, what are you proposing? Sarah activated her emergency communication protocols, establishing a direct link to Earth's Defense Command. I'm proposing we stop thinking like diplomats and start thinking like prey animals fighting for survival. Because that's what we are now. The communication link established connection with Admiral Morrison, Earth's defense commander, whose image appeared on Sarah's secure display. Even through the quantum encryption, his expression was grim as he received Sarah's situation report. Confirmed, Ambassador, Morrison said after reviewing the tactical data. We've been monitoring the situation through classified observation posts. The entities have been probing our defensive perimeters for the past 6 hours. We're implementing Protocol 7 immediately. Several delegates near Sarah's position exchanged confused glances, unfamiliar with human military terminology. But David Park had gone pale as he recognized the designation. Admiral, Sarah said carefully, confirm your assessment of threat level. Existential extinction threat confirmed. Morrison replied without hesitation. Human survival is in immediate jeopardy. All restrictions on defensive capabilities are hereby removed. Earth Defense Command is transitioning to unrestricted warfare protocols. Sarah closed the communication link and turned to face the command center. For the first time since joining the diplomatic corps, she wasn't thinking like an ambassador representing her species' interests in a complex political environment. She was thinking like a member of a species that had survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, and global wars through sheer determination to continue existing. Now we find out, she said quietly, what happens when humanity stops pretending to be civilized. The first sign that something fundamental had changed in the galactic equation came 6 hours after Sarah's communication with Earth. The automated monitoring systems detected massive energy signatures emerging from hyperspace at the edge of human territorial boundaries. Ships were arriving, but not like any vessels the galactic community had seen before. Impossible, whispered technical specialist Zextal, their energy form flickering with patterns of disbelief. The quantum signatures are off any known scale. How many ships did the humans deploy? Sarah studied the sensor readings with growing satisfaction that she kept carefully hidden behind diplomatic composure. Earth Defense Command doesn't discuss fleet deployment details with foreign governments, she replied neutrally. Operational security remains in effect. What the monitoring stations were detecting was the arrival of humanity's true military capacity, not the polite patrol vessels and merchant marine ships that conducted routine operations in Council space, but the deep strike fleets that had been constructed in hidden shipyards throughout the outer human territories. Ships designed not for exploration or trade protection, but for the kind of warfare that civilized species preferred to forget existed. General Thakmore's predatory instincts were fully engaged as he analyzed the incoming data. Energy output suggests vessels significantly larger than standard human configurations. These readings indicate military capacity exceeding our intelligence estimates by several orders of magnitude. Human defensive doctrine emphasizes redundancy and concealment, Sarah replied with the same diplomatic neutrality she might use to discuss trade regulations. Visible fleet strength represents minimum deterrent capability rather than maximum military potential. The revelation was staggering. Every species in the galaxy maintained intelligence services that monitored their neighbors' military capabilities, if only to ensure balanced power relationships. The idea that humanity had concealed the majority of their offensive capacity suggested either extraordinary discipline or fundamentally different strategic thinking. High Chancellor Vextai's crystalline spines were cycling through rapid color changes as he processed the implications. Ambassador Chun, are you saying that human military strength has been deliberately misrepresented to the Council? Not misrepresented, Sarah clarified with careful precision. The Earth Federation has fully complied with all military disclosure requirements for Council membership. We have accurately reported all vessels conducting operations in shared galactic space. The distinction was crucial and terrifying. Humanity had reported their military presence in Council territories while maintaining complete secrecy about forces operating outside those boundaries. It suggested strategic thinking on a scale that most species had not considered necessary since achieving galactic civilization. Lieutenant Commander Park approached with updated intelligence reports from the human fleet's advance elements. Ambassador, reconnaissance data from our forward units. The enemy vessels are moving to intercept our task forces. First contact is estimated in 47 minutes. Sarah nodded acknowledgement while noting the subtle shift in David's language. He had stopped referring to Earth's forces as defensive units and begun using the terminology of an offensive military operation. Protocol 7 apparently included changes in communication procedures as well as strategic deployment. Ambassador Yethka moved closer to Sarah's position, her amphibian features showing deep concern. Ambassador Chun, the Serene Collective wishes to offer whatever assistance our vessels can provide. These entities threaten all galactic life. Appreciate the offer, Sarah replied, though her tone carried new undertones that several delegates found unsettling. However, human forces operate under tactical doctrines that may not integrate well with allied units. Friendly fire incidents could result from coordination difficulties. The polite refusal contained implications that made even General Thakmore pause. Military forces that couldn't safely operate alongside allied units suggested either incompatible technology or combat methods so aggressive that they endangered anyone in proximity. The command center's main display updated with new tactical information as human scout vessels began transmitting intelligence from the front lines. The enemy fleet was larger than initial estimates, composed of hundreds of the massive dark vessels that moved in formations unlike anything in standard military doctrine. Contact in 17 minutes, reported the communication officer. Human forces are maintaining communication silence, but continue to broadcast tactical data for council analysis. Sarah watched the tactical display with professional interest, though something deeper and more primitive was stirring in her mind as she observed the enemy formations. They moved like predators approaching cornered prey, confident in their superior numbers and proven ability to simply erase any resistance they encountered. Preliminary analysis suggests enemy vessel count exceeds human deployment by factor of 4 to 1, announced Zextal after reviewing the tactical data. Human forces may be insufficient to achieve meaningful resistance. Numerical superiority isn't always decisive, Sarah replied with calm confidence that surprised several nearby delegates. Tactical innovation and operational flexibility can compensate for disadvantages in raw numbers. Her statement would have sounded like diplomatic optimism from most species, but something in her tone suggested she had specific knowledge about human tactical capabilities that justified such confidence. General Thakmore's yellow eyes focused on her with new intensity. What operational innovations? He asked directly. Before Sarah could respond, the tactical display erupted with new data as the first engagement began. Energy signatures unlike anything in galactic database appeared as human, and enemy forces made contact at the edge of the Kepler sector. The battle that unfolded on their sensors defied conventional understanding of space warfare. Instead of the orderly exchange of energy weapons at maximum range, the engagement showed signs of close-quarters combat conducted at speeds that stressed the monitoring equipment's ability to track individual vessels. Analysis impossible, reported the Coordination Collective's tactical specialist, all 6 arms working frantically at different control interfaces. Combat velocities exceed safety parameters. Ships are maneuvering at accelerations that should liquefy organic crews. Sarah smiled for the first time since the crisis began, though the expression was closer to a predator's display of teeth than diplomatic pleasantry. Human vessels incorporate acceleration compensation systems designed for extreme combat maneuvering. Our pilots train extensively for high-G tactical operations. The implications were staggering. Most galactic species had developed space combat doctrines that prioritized crew safety and equipment preservation, engaging at distances that minimized risks to personnel. Humanity had apparently designed their military around accepting casualties and equipment losses in exchange for tactical advantage. First enemy vessel eliminated, announced the communication officer with obvious disbelief. Confirmed destruction, not consumption. The entity ship is dispersing energy and matter according to normal physical laws. A wave of shock went through the command center. The unknown entities had seemed invulnerable, simply erasing everything that opposed them without taking damage themselves. The fact that human weapons could actually destroy enemy vessels opened possibilities that had seemed impossible hours earlier. General Thacmore leaned forward with predatory interest. Weapon specifications that achieved destruction? Classified, Sarah replied immediately. Earth Defense Command does not share technical specifications for active weapon systems with foreign governments. The refusal was standard military protocol, but the context made it particularly significant. Humanity had developed weapons capable of destroying enemies that had proven immune to all other galactic military technologies, and they weren't sharing that capability with their supposed allies. More tactical updates flooded the displays as the engagement intensified. Human forces were not just fighting the enemy vessels. They were actively hunting them, pursuing individual ships through complex, three-dimensional maneuvers that forced the entities to respond rather than dictate engagement terms. Human tactics appear to prioritize close engagement over standoff warfare, observed Zextal. This approach maximizes risk to their own forces while limiting enemy advantages in long-range capabilities. Sarah nodded acknowledgement while privately recognizing the deeper truth. Humanity's military doctrine was built around the understanding that sometimes survival required accepting terrible costs to achieve victory. Other species had evolved beyond such thinking, but humans remained willing to trade lives for strategic objectives when necessary. The battle continued for nearly 2 hours, with human forces systematically engaging enemy vessels in individual combat encounters. The tactical display showed a pattern of coordinated strikes that forced enemy ships into isolated fights where numerical superiority became irrelevant. Remarkable tactical coordination, admitted General Thacmore with professional respect. Human commanders are conducting simultaneous multi-vector operations across a volume of space exceeding most species' total territorial boundaries. What impressed the Corvin general was humanity's apparent ability to coordinate complex operations without the centralized command structures that most military forces required. Human ships operated with individual initiative while maintaining overall strategic coherence, suggesting command doctrines that emphasized adaptive response over rigid planning. Human military philosophy emphasizes decentralized decision-making, Sarah explained. Individual commanders are trained to operate independently while contributing to larger strategic objectives. The revelation highlighted another fundamental difference in strategic thinking. Most galactic species had developed military hierarchies designed to prevent unauthorized actions and maintain careful control over violent capabilities. Humanity had apparently chosen to train their military personnel for independent operation in chaotic environments. The tactical display updated with final battle results as the engagement concluded. Enemy forces had withdrawn after losing over 30% of their vessels, while human casualties remained classified, but were apparently within acceptable operational parameters. Impossible, whispered High Chancellor Vextai, his crystalline spines dim with disbelief. How did a junior species achieve decisive victory against entities that have consumed our most advanced military assets? Sarah turned to face the assembled delegates with an expression that several species would later describe in their reports as distinctly predatory. Because we never forgot that survival sometimes requires being more dangerous than whatever is trying to kill you. The command center had grown quiet as the full implications of the human victory became clear. The entities weren't invulnerable. They had simply never encountered resistance from a species that retained the evolutionary instincts for true warfare. What happens now? Asked Ambassador Yethka with obvious concern. Sarah activated her communication link to Admiral Morrison for a status update. His image appeared on her display with the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from successful completion of necessary violence. Phase 1 complete, Ambassador, Morrison reported with military brevity. Enemy forces are withdrawing from all contact zones. We're beginning pursuit operations to ensure they don't regroup for another assault. Pursuit? General Thacmore asked with new interest. Human forces are following retreating enemy vessels. Sarah nodded with the same cold clarity she had felt when learning of her sister's disappearance. Standard Earth defense doctrine requires complete neutralization of existential threats. We don't stop fighting until the enemy no longer possesses the capability to threaten human survival. The assembled delegates exchanged uncertain glances as they processed this information. Most galactic conflicts ended with negotiated settlements once one side demonstrated clear military superiority. The concept of pursuing enemies to complete destruction was outside their normal understanding of warfare. Ambassador Chun, said Council Moderator Ninethal with careful diplomatic phrasing, the Council appreciates human assistance in resolving this crisis. However, continuing military operations may not be necessary now that the immediate threat has been neutralized. Sarah's smile became distinctly predatory as she prepared a response. The other species were still thinking like diplomats, trying to restore the careful balance of galactic politics. But humanity had been forced to remember what it was like to fight for survival, and that awakening was about to reshape the galaxy's understanding of what humans were truly capable of. The pursuit lasted 18 standard days, and when it ended, the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Sarah Chan stood in the same council chambers where this crisis had begun, but everything about the political landscape was different. The elegant diplomatic protocols and careful power balances that had governed galactic civilization for millennia had been shattered by the revelation of what humanity was capable of when their survival was threatened. Final battle report confirms total enemy fleet elimination. Admiral Morrison announced through the secure communication link that now connected Earth Defense Command directly to the Council Emergency Center. All hostile vessels have been destroyed. No enemy survivors detected in any operational theater. The assembled delegates listened to this announcement with a mixture of relief and growing apprehension. The existential threat had been eliminated, but the methods used to achieve that elimination had revealed capabilities that fundamentally altered the galactic balance of power. General Thakmore, whose own species was considered the galaxy's premier military force, studied the tactical reports with professional fascination and barely concealed concern. Human forces pursued enemy vessels across 17 star systems, conducting elimination operations in 8 different galactic territories without requesting permission from local governments. The statement was both accurate and diplomatically explosive. Humanity had just demonstrated the ability to project military force anywhere in the galaxy while operating independently of established political structures. The implications were staggering for every species that had based their security on territorial sovereignty and diplomatic agreements. Earth defense protocols prioritize threat elimination over political boundaries when human survival is at stake, Sarah replied with the same cold precision she had maintained throughout the crisis. Diplomatic considerations become secondary to operational requirements during existential emergencies. High Chancellor Vextai's crystalline spines flickered with agitation patterns as he processed the broader implications. Ambassador Chun, human forces have demonstrated military capabilities that exceed all previous intelligence estimates. Your fleets operated in Zephyrian sovereign space without authorization or coordination with our defense forces. Sarah's response carried undertones that made several delegates unconsciously step back from her position. Human forces operated in areas where Zephyrian defense forces had failed to prevent existential threats to galactic civilization. We filled the operational vacuum that your military capabilities could not address. The brutal assessment was delivered with diplomatic language, but its meaning was unmistakable. Humanity had proven that the established galactic powers were inadequate to protect their own territories from serious threats, while human forces could operate anywhere they chose regardless of political objections. Technical specialist Zextal manifested their energy form with patterns indicating deep philosophical disturbance. Analysis of human combat operations reveals tactical doctrines fundamentally incompatible with accepted principles of civilized warfare. Human forces deliberately engaged in actions that resulted in massive structural damage to 3-star systems. The ethereal was referring to the fact that human pursuit operations had involved weapons capable of destabilizing stellar phenomena as tactical tools. Several asteroid fields had been completely vaporized, 2 gas giants had lost significant atmospheric mass, and one small star had been artificially triggered into increased solar activity to deny enemy forces hiding places in its outer system. Collateral damage is acceptable when weighed against species survival, Sarah replied with matter-of-fact calm that sent chills through the assembled delegates. Human tactical doctrine prioritizes mission completion over environmental preservation when facing extinction threats. Ambassador Yethka approached with obvious distress, her amphibian features pale with shock. Ambassador Chun, the Serene Collective has received reports that human forces eliminated 3 civilian installations that had been captured by the enemy entities. The installations contained thousands of non-human survivors. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah had been waiting for this question since the tactical reports began arriving, and her response had been carefully prepared through consultation with Earth's political leadership. Human commanders made tactical decisions based on available intelligence regarding enemy consumption capabilities, she said with unwavering composure. Captured installations were assessed as compromised beyond recovery. Immediate elimination prevented enemy forces from utilizing absorbed personnel as intelligence sources for continued operations against remaining civilian populations. The cold logic was undeniable, but horrifying. Humanity had calculated that sacrificing thousands of already captured beings was preferable to allowing the enemy to potentially gain intelligence that could be used to capture millions more. It was the kind of utilitarian analysis that civilized species had specifically evolved beyond making. General Thakmore understood the tactical reasoning better than the others, but even his warrior culture found the implications disturbing. Human decision-making appears to prioritize long-term species survival over individual preservation. This represents fundamental differences in value assessment compared to established galactic norms. Sarah nodded acknowledgement of his observation. Human civilization has survived multiple extinction events through willingness to make necessary sacrifices for species continuity. Our decision-making frameworks reflect this evolutionary experience. Council moderator Ninethal's tentacles writhed with distress patterns as he attempted to process the new reality. The Council must address the political implications of recent events. Human military actions, while effective in eliminating the immediate threat, have created unprecedented challenges for galactic governance structures. The ancient being was diplomatically acknowledging what everyone in the chamber understood. Humanity had just demonstrated that they could ignore galactic law and political authority whenever they determined it was necessary for their survival. The careful balance of power that maintained galactic peace was now completely disrupted. What are Earth's intentions regarding future military deployments? Asked Chancellor Morthek of the Aquatic Alliance with obvious concern. Sarah activated her communication link to Admiral Morrison for official confirmation of Earth's position. His response was delivered with military precision that left no room for misinterpretation. Earth Defense Command maintains continuous readiness posture for intervention against existential threats to human interests, Morrison announced. Military assets remain deployed for rapid response to emerging situations regardless of political boundaries or diplomatic constraints. The statement was essentially a declaration that humanity would act unilaterally whenever they perceived threats to their survival, without regard for established galactic law or political agreements. It was a return to the kind of power politics that civilized species had worked for millennia to transcend. Sub-Chancellor Mordex spoke with careful diplomatic phrasing that barely concealed his species' growing fear. The Zephyrian Star Command requests clarification regarding human definitions of existential threats that might trigger future military interventions. Sarah's smile contained no warmth as she prepared her response. Human threat assessment protocols are classified. However, species or entities that demonstrate the capability and intention to harm human interests will be evaluated for preemptive neutralization. The implications were staggering. Humanity was essentially announcing that they would attack anyone they perceived as potentially dangerous, based on their own classified criteria, without warning or negotiation. It was the kind of aggressive posture that most species associated with primitive civilizations, but backed by demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything else in the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Park approached with the final intelligence reports from the pursuit operations. Ambassador, our deep reconnaissance units have completed surveys of enemy origin points. The entities appear to have originated from outside known galactic boundaries, possibly from intergalactic space. This revelation provided crucial context for understanding the crisis, but also raised new questions about humanity's response to threats. The enemy had been completely eliminated despite originating from regions beyond any species' territorial claims or strategic interests. Why did human forces pursue enemies beyond the boundaries of known space? Asked Zextal with obvious confusion about human motivations. Sarah's response revealed the depth of humanity's transformation during the crisis. Because threats to human survival require elimination regardless of distance or political considerations. Geographic boundaries are irrelevant when facing extinction scenarios. The assembled delegates were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species had undergone complete psychological transformation from diplomatic junior partner to apex predator within a matter of days, triggered by existential threat to their survival. General Thakmore asked the question that every species representative was thinking. What does Earth want from the galactic community moving forward? Sarah turned to address the entire chamber, her voice carrying authority that hadn't been there during her years of diplomatic service. Earth wants what every species wants: security for our people and freedom to pursue our interests without interference. The difference is that we've now demonstrated our willingness and capability to ensure those wants become reality. High Chancellor Vexdai's spines flickered with resignation as he recognized the new political reality. The Council acknowledges that recent events have created new circumstances requiring adjustment of existing agreements and protocols. What he was diplomatically acknowledging was humanity's transition from junior member to dominant power in galactic politics. Every other species would now have to factor human military capabilities and aggressive doctrine into their strategic planning, fundamentally altering the balance of power that had maintained galactic stability. Ambassador Yethka made one final attempt to restore diplomatic normalcy. Perhaps the Council could establish new frameworks for cooperation that account for different species' security requirements while maintaining peaceful coexistence. Sarah's laugh contained genuine amusement, though it wasn't particularly reassuring to the other delegates. Ambassador Yethka, peaceful coexistence requires all parties to be committed to peace. What you've learned about humanity is that we're committed to survival. Peace is preferable, but survival is non-negotiable. As the session concluded and delegates prepared to return to their home governments with reports that would reshape galactic politics, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had occurred. Humanity had entered this crisis as a minor species seeking acceptance in galactic civilization. They were leaving it as the galaxy's new apex predator, with demonstrated capabilities and declared intentions that would force every other species to re-evaluate their assumptions about power, survival, and the nature of civilized behavior. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's predator trigger, and nothing would ever be the same. The careful diplomatic balance that had maintained peace for millennia was gone, replaced by the simple understanding that one species was now capable of eliminating any threat to their survival, regardless of political consequences or moral considerations. As Sarah prepared her final report to Earth, she realized that humanity had not just survived their first existential crisis as a galactic species. They had emerged from it as the galaxy's ultimate survivors, willing to do whatever was necessary to ensure their continued existence. The other species would have to decide whether they could coexist with that reality or whether they preferred to test humanity's commitment to their newly revealed nature. Either way, the galaxy now understood what humans were capable of when their survival was threatened. The age of diplomatic humanity was over, and the age of apex humanity had begun.